Welcome to the Daily MBA, where business wisdom is served fresh and fast, straight from one of the top MBA programs in the world. I'll give you summaries of my lectures and readings, as well as the most important insights gained from an MBA, so you can apply all of this knowledge in every business. Let's get started. In today's episode, I'm going to start talking about a word that you've probably been hearing about 100 times this year already, and it's inflation. So everybody's been talking about inflation, governments, companies, but what does inflation really mean? That is what we're going to look and understand in today's episode and all of the implications that this means. But let's start by the beginning. What really is inflation? This is going to be the rate at which prices of goods are rising. And so it can be classified into three types, which can be demand pull, cost push, or built-in. But this is going to be a bit more technical. The only thing that you need to know is basically that prices of things are going up. This is inflation. And so is it bad per se? No, this is actually not a bad thing. If prices of things are going up by a little bit, this is going to be a sign of a healthy economy. And we always want to have a little bit of inflation. The current US target and Canada target is going to be 2%. So we actually want things to get 2% more expensive every year. But what we would never like is for things to be deflated. And what would this mean? It's the opposite of inflation. So things are going to start getting cheaper. And if you already like macroeconomics, you might have seen that Japan had this issue. And deflation is actually going to be terribly dangerous into an economy. Because what deflation means is that since things are going to be cheaper tomorrow, why would I buy things today? This brings a very vicious cycle because people don't want to consume. This is going to slow down the economy. And so if people aren't consuming, companies are going to start firing more people. And this is going to lead into a cycle of more and more deflation where you can't really get out of that. The opposite, so what I was telling you, inflation, a little bit of it is good. But, of course, there's a downside. If you have high inflation, this is going to bring many costs. And so inflation specifically is going to have 5 big costs into the economy. And I'm going to summarize them into just saying basically lack of efficiency and societal costs. But let's look at each one of them very fast. The first one is called menu costs, and this one is the one that's more visible to us. So if you've been to a restaurant lately, you might see that either they pasted some tape on top of the menu to correct that the price is now $12 instead of $10, how it used to be last year. And so this menu costs are going to be literally the effort that it takes to reprice everything in the economy. And so even though the current inflation levels aren't as ginormous, when you have hyperinflation or you have situations like Argentina right now or Venezuela, you're going to have prices literally changing from the morning to the evening. So this is going to be very hard for people to keep up, and it's bringing lots of menu costs in because you can't really put a price into something that is going to change its price in 5 days, in 20 days, in even 1 month. This is going to be exhausting. So this is going to be the first big inflation cost. Second inflation cost would be the people that have fixed incomes. And so fixed incomes are not going to be adapting with inflation. And what this means is that people who don't get a raise, technically, are going to be soaking up all of these costs of inflation. So that is very bad for society, and especially people that have fixed incomes are going to be pension holders. And so this is not a good situation because we have people that actually need their income and they are being affected by a situation that's out of their hands. The third big cost would be confusing agents and inefficiencies in the market. And according to my professor, probably this one is the one that has the highest effect because inflation brings something that is called confusing agents. And what this means is that you don't know if these changes that we're experiencing right now in the market are permanent or if they are temporary. So maybe people are not coming to your store just because it's a situational thing, and maybe in 6 months they will come. But what if it's a permanent thing? If you can't be sure about the things that are happening now being permanent or temporary, this is going to affect your decision making. And in business, this is crucial because you're usually planning on what to do in the future. So if you can't be sure of what to do, how long it will last, the effect, this is going to bring inefficiencies into the market because sometimes a company may decide to close one of its branches because people are not coming in. But it was just an inflation cost, and maybe in 6 months, they will be all looking forward to going back into that store again. So all of these confusing agents are going to be the biggest creator of inefficiencies in the economy with inflation. The fourth cost is going to be purchasing power parity. And what this means is that purchasing power parity, usually abbreviated as PPP, means how much you can buy with your current income. If your income is not growing as much as inflation, then technically you can buy less with the same money that you used to have. And this is something bad, and that we, of course, would like to avoid because even though we are getting a raise, technically it means that we can't buy as much as we could in the past.
The land down under has never been easier to reach. United Airlines has more flights between the U.S. and Australia than any other U.S. airline, so you can fly nonstop to destinations like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Explore dazzling cities, savor the very best of Aussie cuisine, and get up close and personal with the wildlife. Who doesn't want to hold a koala? Go to united.com/Australia to book your adventure.
The fifth and final inflationary cost is going to be my next topic that I'll talk about, and it's a recession. And so this may sound a bit dramatic, but what we're going to see later is that when you have high inflation, this is kind of a forecast for a recession because the only way of bringing down an inflation used to be through a recession. This is proving not to be true since this year's hikes of interest rates, but usually this is what it happened. You had high inflation, that meant a recession was coming. And so overall, yes, it is going to be a very bad thing, and that's why governments usually aim to have inflation in a range between 1% to 3% per year. And as soon as it starts going out of that, they have to start acting so it doesn't get out of their hands. What are the typical causes of inflation? Usually 3. Shifts in demand, shifts in supply, usually by supply chain disruptions, or printing money. And this last one is going to be very important because printing money is usually something that does not only cause inflation, it will cause hyperinflation, which is what you see when you get the super ginormous rates of inflation like 100%. This is not normal. The prices are now 2 times as much as they used to be last year. And it's usually going to be due to printing of money and putting it into the economy. So all of the printing of money has to go in the economy for it to have the inflationary effect. And so now that we know the causes, we have to go to the solution. So this is what I was anticipating before. How do we fix inflation? The only way to fight inflation is with interest rates. And this is going to mean that if you raise interest rates, which is what is happening right now and all over the world, the economy is going to slow down because people can't borrow money. Companies can't borrow money. It's going to be too expensive. And so the economy starts slowing down. And when economy starts slowing down is when inflation decreases. And until we get back to the range of 1 to 3%, ideally 2%, this is going to happen. What usually has happened historically, except for this year, is that when interest rates go up, the economy slows down so much that it falls into a recession. And there are technically 3 scenarios that could happen after the interest rate hikes. The best case scenario would be a soft landing. So this one is the one that we are experiencing right now. It seems like we are returning into normal numbers without recession. But the second scenario, which is the most likely scenario, it's a V-shaped recovery. And this means is that we have a recession, but we recover fast. And so this was 2008. We fell into a recession, but very fast we bounced back up. So that's why it's like a V-shaped. So you're falling and then rising again, and you're going back to normal levels. The worst case scenario, which would be the third scenario, would be one that's called stagflation. And this one is one that economists are fearing because it means that you rise interest rates, you have a recession, but that didn't fix inflation and you still have high inflation. And this is usually considered like an L recovery. So it goes down, but then it stays down and basically never goes back up to the level where it was supposed to be going. And this is what happened in the Great Depression. But since then, governments and central banks have learned their lessons, and we haven't gone back into the worst case scenario yet. So I just gave you 3 examples of all of the scenarios. Best case scenario would probably be this year. So all of the interest rates that are happening after the pandemic, they are not leading us into a recession, apparently, or not until now. The most likely scenario was the 2008 crisis, and then the worst case scenario was the Great Depression, 1921 depression. And so what is one key concept that I want to highlight when we're talking about depressions? It's confidence. Because confidence in the economy is going to prevent a recession. And even though this sounds weird, it's true, because if people feel pessimistic about the economy, this fear will bring in a recession because people will stop spending more, you will start saving more at home. And so we are like animals with our money. We are going to act irrationally with it. And if you let fear hit any economy, then fear is going to be the one that's leading to a recession. So even though it sounds ambiguous and vague, confidence is going to be playing a key role into the outcomes of interest rate hikes. So now, I want to finish up my episode by going back to the beginning and thinking, what is really a recession? So a recession, theoretically, is going to be when there is a negative GDP growth over 2 consecutive quarters. But this definition is now being a little bit changed and modified by the US. And what we really are looking for is the empirical explanation of a recession. And this is when the economy contracts and there are wide job losses in the market. And so this hasn't happened yet. But what I'm going to be explaining in my next episode is that inflation and unemployment have traditionally had an inverse relationship. And therefore, when you have higher inflation, you will have less unemployment. And the opposite, when you have low inflation, you're going to have high unemployment. So reducing inflation may lead to job losses. In my next episode, we'll be exploring everything about the labor market. So be sure to check that one out and share this episode with your friends that also want to learn about business. If you like my episodes, please give me a review as well. I'll see you in my next episode.